This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
All right there, everyone. Greta Thunberg's self-righteous rage activism is already backfiring on environmentalists. That's what we're talking about on today's video. That's right. As much as the media tried to portray her as a saint in the making, we're going to find out why more and more people were entirely put off by Greta Thunberg's performance at the United Nations, and why the environmentalist movement will become even more ineffective as a result. But first, imagine if you'd received a personal invitation to invest a mere $50 in Uber when it was just a startup. On IPO day, the day it went public, you could have made nearly $250,000. That same $50 invested in Amazon before it IPO'd could have made you over $7 million. So how would you feel if you could lock in a ground floor opportunity in the hottest startups this year that everybody's fighting over? Well, you can. Now, I'm sure you all know the multimillionaire investor, now TV star, Robert Herjavec from the hit show Shark Tank, right? My family always, my kids, I love him. Well, he and his team of ultra-successful angel investors are here to help you get in on ground floor investment opportunities. Watch the free video at getangelrich.com or click on the link in the description below and see how you can participate in these potentially lucrative deals before they go mainstream. So don't wait. Check out the video at getangelrich.com. Well, at least she didn't advocate cannibalism. I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar by now with the 16-year-old climate change activist Greta Thunberg, she's become the new icon of the environmentalist movement, and thus a saint, a Mother Teresa for the fawning devotees of all things leftist liberal in our neo-Marxist media. If you read the reports on her speech at the United Nations the other day, I mean, these so-called pundits are lauding and praising her speech as a seminal moment in the history of the United Nations. It was heralded as the passionate and powerful speech which is rightly making headlines around the world. It was a call to arms for all the nations of the world. Even one media outlet praised what they called her white-hot rage. Obviously, the media is trying to sell us something here, right? This Greta Thunberg has become the new face of the globalist environmentalist movement. And for some reason, leftists believe that this time, radical, unhinged, hysterical environmental radicalism is going to work. It's going to convince the masses. Then they'll be lining up to vote for the politicians that promise to enact comparable Green New Deals. But there are a number of observers out there who are rightly expressing a general alarm at what they're seeing here, as Jake Novak over at CNBC reports. There are a number of people who are not seeing Greta Thunberg as a new Mother Teresa of the environment. Instead, they're seeing an indoctrinated child who's being cruelly coerced and manipulated by adults who are using her as a human shield, effectively deflecting any form of valid critique or criticism against them. However, here's the problem, and I think Charles Cook over at National Review summed it up best here. He says there are 3 rules that no one can escape. First, if you comment on politics, you are liable to be criticized, okay? Here's the second rule. The more vehement you get in your rhetoric, the more vehement the reactions against you are likely to be. And here's the third rule. There are no exceptions to the first 2 rules, right? So you see, it is certainly clear that Greta's appearance on the world stage signals a change in environmental movement tactics. No question, right? They're starting to use now children. However, the irony in all this is that this new tactic on the part of environmentalists and employing children as their new face it's already backfiring. Not only are environmentalists showing themselves as more divisive and combative than ever before, but if the United Nations gathering was any indicator, they're becoming even more ineffective. They're convincing less people than ever before. Here's what we have to understand in all this, all right? Generally speaking, just as sort of backdrop here, the Green Movement has been the left's anti-globalist movement, okay? One of the key themes that we deal with each week on this channel is that globalism is dying, okay? Globalism is currently reduced to trying to find solutions to the problems it itself creates. Globalism has gone as far as it can go, and populations are more and more turning away from its vision of life. We're clearly seeing this on the side of the political right. The political right is more and more turning towards nation, culture, custom, and tradition, nationalism, populism, and traditionalism as the only basis for a sustainable future. Now, in contrast to nation, culture, custom, and tradition, what's generally attracted the anti-globalist left has been the environment. They see the industrialization of the world by globalization to be ecologically unsustainable. And so thus far, they've offered their own leftist critique of globalization through environmental activism. What this girl, Greta, at the United Nations is doing, however, along with the adults that are guiding her, managing her, of course, we'd say manipulating her, they're all seeking now to harness globalization, to make their peace with globalization in order to use globalized institutions and mechanisms to impose a one-size-fits-all environmentalist radicalism on all populations. So what they're doing now is they're shifting almost all the focus away from personal responsibility, from like recycling and awareness, to now pressuring governments and big corporations, the very institutions of globalization, to enact a one-size-fits-all mandated environmental, regulative, and standardized system. Again, as Jake Novak over at CNBC puts it, their argument is that individual people can't do this anymore. Individual people can't save the world from climate change disaster when evil energy companies and governments that are supposedly focused only on economic growth just don't care enough to enact the changes that these environmentalists think are needed. So it's just another way of saying that Greta represents a radically globalist-inspired environmentalism that seeks to harness the very globalist structures that were once blamed for ecological ruin for their own power and benefit. And this shift in tactic, where environmentalists are no longer protesting globalist structures, but actually seeking to take them over, this should cause us to ask a number of questions, shouldn't it? First off, have you noticed, based on the politically partisan slogans and signs we saw at the climate protests over the past few days, why on earth are we so sure that the top motivation in all this is the environment and not really politics and power? Why are members of the media so certain that Greta's only motivation here is the environment? So you see, leftists are always the ones who invoke a kind of hermeneutic of suspicion, right? They're so skeptical of everything, right? You hear things like, the nuclear family is just a mechanism for patriarchy. We actually did a video a couple of weeks back. There was a scholar that was trying to make the argument that heterosexuality was a major tool of patriarchal oppression. Or you've heard capitalism is just an economic mechanism for aristocratic dominance and power. The left always employs a critical theory that questions the motives of everyone. Everyone, that is, except leftists. Where's the critical theory here with Greta and the environmentalists? Why are we so certain about the purity of their motives? Who's funding them? Who's involved in their organizations? What other organizations are they a part of? Why isn't the media, we all know the answer, why is the media as skeptical about these environmentalists as the environmentalists were once so skeptical about globalist institutions that they're now trying to take over? Moreover, where's the critical scrutiny about their claims? Why is Greta's hysterical pronouncements about the state of our planet taken as givens? Climate change, technically speaking, at least when we're talking about the hyperbolic statements of what's about to happen, climate change that we're hearing about is predominantly about predictions. How accurate have they been? And we're talking many different predictions that are all based on many different models, over 100 different computer program models, as I understand it. And so one of the key questions I think we need to ask is that if climate change is such a given, such a settled science, why are there more than 100 different methods and models? Many of which, by the way, have horrific rates of failure. Right? It's been a rather embarrassingly well-documented fact that computer-generated models for climate change have been rather disastrous in terms of their predictability accuracy. And this is because the assumption among environmentalists is that the Earth is static in nature. In other words, if you don't mess with the Earth stays the same. It doesn't change. Its climate constituents remain unchanged. That we're finding is not true. The Earth is not static. For example, we have evidence that sea levels have indeed been rising 6 to 7 inches in certain places of the Earth. That does appear to be absolutely true, but those sea levels have been rising for the last 800 years, long before the rise of the Industrial Age, long before the horrors of CO2 emissions. Moreover, there are a number of scientists who actually argue that the carbon dioxide that's supposedly behind the rise of temperatures is actually following the temperature rise. In other words, the rising heat is accompanied by rising CO2, not the other way around. In fact, there are scientists who actually believe that the rising CO2 levels are actually good for the environment. For example, if you put in a lot of carbon dioxide in the water, in the ocean, we have studies that show that crabs and lobsters actually benefit and grow bigger. Check this exchange out over on Capitol Hill a few years back. I think it was during the Obama administration. This is the kind of questioning that we need to give these environmental activists. Watch this.
Responsibility, openness of government, etc. Let me ask you, what percentage of the atmosphere is CO2?
What percentage of the atmosphere is CO2? I don't have that calculation for you, sir.
Maybe you could tell us what your personal guess is on what percentage of the CO2.
I don't make those guesses, sir.
You're the head of the EPA and you don't know? You have all of these laws based on, you're going to get your staffer to tell you now. But you're the head of the EPA and you did not know what percentage, and now you are basing policies that impact dramatically on the American people, and you didn't even know what the content of CO2 in the atmosphere was, which is the justification for the very policies you're talking about?
No,
well, thank you.
If you're asking me how much CO2 is in the atmosphere, not a percentage, but how much, we have just reached levels of 400 parts per million.
I think I was very clear what I was asking, and I was very clear you didn't know. Let me ask you if CO2, from what I have understand.
Again, this is the problem. When you've reduced everything to a single one-dimensional answer, carbon bad. Heck, we have geological studies that have found that there was a time in our history when there was no ice during the summertime in the North Pole. We found algae fossils at the bottom of the North Pole Sea, which you can only get when the sun directly shines on the water. We know the Vikings used to grow barley on Greenland. Okay, Greenland was much hotter than it is today. And besides, the whole notion of an average temperature for the Earth, many consider absurd. Boston goes through a climate change between minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit to over 90 degrees in the summer. And we want to talk about some normalized average climate temperature for the entire Earth? Greta Thunberg represents a one-dimensional response to the dynamic nature of the Earth. And more people are questioning the accuracy or even the motivation of that response. So, for example, as Tucker Carlson has wonderfully noted, have you ever noticed that the problem is never China or India or Hollywood elites? The problem for environmentalists is never the amount of fuel it takes to air condition Al Gore's mansion or to fly Leonardo DiCaprio's private jet. No, the problem is always you. You're the problem. You're the threat. And now we actually have children coming out and explicitly saying that. What these environmentalists are getting is They're laying explicit blame at the feet of the people, while at the same time advocating globalist-based solutions. And that is what's going to seal their fate. By marrying their environmentalist radicalism to globalization and blaming the populations of Western nations as a whole, while turning a blind eye to the aristocratic elite and their abuses, they've climbed on board of a sinking ship. The only thing we can be sure is destined for extinction is the self-righteous rage activism that we are seeing so obnoxiously on display. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to click on the link below and pre-order your own Nationalist Populist book bundle with swag at a $50 discount. The offer ends permanently by midnight of the last day of September, so don't wait. Get your Nationalist Populist book bundle with swag and know that you are supporting this channel and helping us to analyze current events in light of super awesome conservative trends so that you can live in the present in light of even better things to come. God bless.